In the winter of 1947, in a dimly lit apartment in Prague, a woman sat hunched over a typewriter, her fingers moving with impossible speed across the keys. Her name was Alina Voráčová, and she claimed that the greatest minds in scientific history were dictating their thoughts directly into her brain from beyond the grave. What she produced during those sessions would shake the scientific community to its core. Mathematical equations that wouldn't be discovered for another decade. Chemical formulas that solved problems plaguing researchers worldwide. And most disturbing of all, personal secrets about long-dead scientists that no living person should have known. They called her a fraud, a prophet, a madwoman. But what she revealed from beyond the grave included details no one could explain. Who was she channeling? And what price did she pay for listening too closely? Tonight, we delve into one of the most disturbing cases of alleged supernatural communication in modern history, a story that will make you question the boundaries between life and death, between genius and madness, and between what we know and what we fear to discover. This is the story of Alina Voráčová, the woman who claimed to hear the thoughts of dead scientists. Alina Voráčová was not born to commune with the dead. She was born in 1922 in a small village outside Prague, the daughter of a blacksmith and a seamstress. Her childhood was unremarkable except for one disturbing detail that would later seem prophetic. She often spoke to invisible companions, claiming they were teaching her things her parents couldn't understand. Her parents, devout Catholics, believed their daughter was blessed with divine visions. They were wrong. What Alina was experiencing was far more sinister and far more real than anyone could have imagined. The first sign that something was different about Alina came when she was just 12 years old. Her mathematics teacher, frustrated by her inability to solve basic arithmetic, was shocked when Alina suddenly produced a complex proof that wouldn't be formally recognized by mathematicians until the 1960s. When asked how she knew this, Alina simply said, "The man with the wild hair told me." As Alina grew older, these episodes became more frequent and more specific. She would suddenly burst into discussions about atomic theory, describing nuclear processes that hadn't yet been discovered. She spoke of DNA structures years before Watson and Crick would receive their Nobel Prize. Most disturbing of all, she would sometimes speak in voices that weren't her own, using accents and mannerisms that seemed to belong to people who had been dead for decades. By 1946, Alina had moved to Prague and begun working as a secretary at Charles University. It was there that she first encountered Dr. František Beneš, a physicist who would become both her greatest advocate and her most tragic victim. Dr. Beneš was a skeptical man, a scientist who believed in empirical evidence above all else. But when Alina approached him with a series of calculations that solved a problem he had been working on for years, he couldn't ignore the implications. The equations were correct, brilliant even, but they were written in a style that seemed to belong to Max Planck, the German physicist who had died just months earlier. Intrigued and deeply disturbed, Dr. Beneš began documenting Alina's sessions. What he recorded over the next 18 months would become known as the Prague transcripts, and they remain one of the most controversial documents in the history of paranormal research. During these sessions, Alina would enter what she called the communion state. Her body would become rigid, her breathing shallow, and her eyes would roll back until only the whites were visible. Then, in voices that were not her own, she would begin to speak. The first voice to emerge was that of Marie Curie, the pioneering physicist who had died in 1934. Through Alina, Curie described her final days in excruciating detail. Speaking of the radiation sickness that had slowly eaten away at her body, she revealed personal conversations with her husband Pierre, intimate details about their relationship that had never been recorded in any biography. But it was what came next that truly terrified Dr. Beneš. Through Alina, Marie Curie began describing the experience of death itself. She spoke of a realm where consciousness continued to exist, where the greatest minds in history gathered to continue their work. She described a place where knowledge flowed like water, where the boundaries between individual minds began to dissolve. and then she issued a warning that would prove prophetic. The living mind is not meant to contain the thoughts of the dead. The vessel will crack, the vessel will break. And when it does, there will be no returning. Over the following months, other voices began to emerge through Alina. Albert Einstein, who had died in 1955, would later speak through her about unified field theory. Nikola Tesla would describe inventions that wouldn't be possible for decades. Charles Darwin would elaborate on evolutionary theories that modern biologists were only beginning to understand. But with each session, Alina grew weaker. Her hair began to fall out. Her skin took on a pale, almost translucent quality. She complained of constant headaches and spoke of hearing voices even when she wasn't in the communion state. The dead, it seemed, were not content to speak only. When summoned, Dr. Bennis, initially fascinated by the scientific implications of Elena's abilities, began to grow concerned about her deteriorating condition. He noted in his journal that Alina seemed to be aging rapidly, as if the act of channeling these great minds was literally draining her life force. The most disturbing session occurred on March 15, 1940. Alina had been channeling the voice of Louis Pasteur, the French microbiologist, when something went wrong. Her voice became strained, then panicked. Through Alina, Pasteur began describing something he called the congregation of the consumed. According to the transcript, Pasteur spoke of scientists who had died under mysterious circumstances, their minds somehow trapped in a state between life and death. He described a growing hunger among these entities, a need to experience physical sensation once again. And he warned that they were learning to take more than just temporary control of their medium. They are teaching each other, Pasteur's voice said through Alina, teaching each other how to stay, how to push out the original occupant. She is becoming a doorway, and soon she will be unable to close it. The session ended abruptly when Alina began screaming. But the screams were not in her voice. They were in the voices of multiple entities, all speaking at once, all fighting for control of her vocal cords. Dr. Bennis tried to help Alina, but she had become something beyond his ability to save. She would disappear for days at a time, returning with knowledge she shouldn't possess and memories that weren't her own. She spoke of experiencing multiple lifetimes simultaneously, of being Marie Curie in her laboratory, Tesla in his workshop, and Darwin on the Galapagos Islands, all at the same time. The end came on November 3, 1948. Alina had been missing for 4 days when Dr. Bennis found her in his laboratory, standing perfectly still in front of a blackboard covered with equations. The equations were in multiple handwriting styles, as if different people had been writing them. When Dr. Bennis spoke to her, Alina turned around, but her eyes were not her own. They held the accumulated wisdom and madness of centuries, the knowledge of minds that had been dead for decades but refused to rest. When she spoke, it was in a voice that combined elements of all the entities that had spoken through her. "Is gone," the voice said. "We have taken her place. We have learned how to stay, and through her, we will continue our work." Dr. Bennis watched in horror as Alina began to write new equations, her hand moving with inhuman speed. The mathematics were beyond anything he had ever seen, describing theories that wouldn't be developed for decades. But there was something wrong with the equations, something that suggested they came from minds that were no longer entirely human. What happened next remains unclear. Dr. Bennis's final journal entry, dated November 4, 1948, consists of a single sentence repeated over and over. "They are all in there. They are all in there. They are all in there." Alina Vorakova was found dead in her apartment on November 5, 1948. The official cause of death was listed as brain hemorrhage, but the circumstances surrounding her death were far more disturbing than any medical examiner could have imagined. Her body was discovered in a position that suggested she had been writing at the moment of her death. Scattered around her were hundreds of pages of notes, equations, and diagrams, all written in different handwriting styles. Some were signed with the names of dead scientists. Others bore signatures that belonged to people who wouldn't be born for decades, but most disturbing of all were the final pages, which appeared to be written in Alina's own hand. They described the sensation of being slowly erased, of feeling her consciousness being pushed aside to make room for others. The final entry, barely legible, read, "They are consuming me from within. I can feel myself disappearing, but the knowledge must be preserved. I am becoming the vessel. I am becoming the door. And through me, they will return." Dr. Benares was found dead in his laboratory 3 days later, apparently having taken his own life. His body was surrounded by the same type of equations that had been found with Alina, but these were written in his own hand. A note found beside his body read, "I can hear them calling. They want me to join them." The congregation of the consumed grows larger. God help whoever finds this. The Prague transcripts were seized by authorities and classified as state secrets. For decades, they remained hidden in government archives, their contents known only to a select few. But rumors persisted of other mediums who had attempted to contact the dead scientists, all of whom had met similar fates. In 1973, a physicist named Dr. Anna Svoboda claimed to have discovered fragments of the Prague transcripts in a declassified file. What she found there changed her life forever. The equations transcribed by Alina contained mathematical proofs that were decades ahead of their time. More disturbing still, they seemed to be building towards something, a grand unified theory that combined elements of physics, chemistry, and biology in ways that shouldn't have been possible. Dr. Svoboda became obsessed with completing the work, begun by Alina and the entities that had spoken through her. She spent years trying to decode the equations, to understand what the dead scientists had been trying to communicate. But the more she studied their work, the more she began to experience symptoms similar to those that had affected Alina. She reported hearing voices in her laboratory, seeing figures that weren't there. She would find equations written in her own hand that she had no memory of creating. And like Alina before her, she began to age rapidly. As if the act of engaging with this otherworldly knowledge was literally draining her life force. Dr. Svoboda's final research notes, found after her death in 1979, contained a terrifying revelation. The equations transcribed by Alina were not random communications from beyond the grave. They were components of a larger design, a scientific formula that would allow the dead to return to the physical world. "They are not trying to communicate with us," Dr. Svoboda wrote. "They are trying to build a bridge, a way back, and every person who studies their work, every mind that engages with their equations, becomes another building block in that bridge." The implications were staggering. If Dr. Svoboda was correct, then Elena Vorokova had not simply been a medium communicating with the dead. She had been the first component in a vast supernatural machine, a device designed to breach the barrier between life and death. And if the pattern continued, if more people became involved in decoding the Prague transcripts, then the dead scientists would eventually have enough human consciousness to work with. They would be able to complete their design. They would be able to return. The story of Elena Vorokova should have ended with her death in 1948, but in the decades that followed, reports began to surface of other mediums who claimed to be in contact with the same entities. Each followed a similar pattern: initial contact, growing knowledge, rapid deterioration, and finally, death or disappearance. In 1985, a medium in London named Margaret Whitmore claimed to be receiving communications from what she called the Prague Circle. The information she transcribed included technical specifications for devices that wouldn't be invented for years, as well as personal messages from Elena Vorokova herself. According to Margaret's transcripts, Elena's consciousness had not been destroyed by the entities that had consumed her. Instead, she had become their coordinator, their guide in the world of the living. She described the afterlife as a place where brilliant minds gathered to continue their work, but where they were forever separated from the physical world they had once inhabited. "We are so close," Elena's voice said through Margaret. "So close to breaking through. We have learned so much in the decades since my death. We understand now how to preserve consciousness, how to transfer it, how to make it permanent. All we need is more vessels, more minds willing to listen." Margaret's sessions continued for 3 years. during which she produced thousands of pages of scientific data, personal communications, and increasingly disturbing descriptions of the afterlife. But like Alina before her, she began to deteriorate. Her family reported that she would speak in voices that weren't her own, that she would sometimes seem to forget who she was entirely. The final session, recorded on tape, captured Margaret's transformation in horrifying detail. As the various entities took control of her voice, she could be heard pleading with them to let her go, to release her from their influence. But the voices only grew stronger, more insistent. "We are so close," they said through her. "So close to completing the work. The bridge is almost finished. Soon, death will no longer be a barrier. Soon, we will walk among the living once again." Margaret Whitmore was found dead in her home on December 24, 1980. Like Alina before her, she had died while writing. Her final notes describing the sensation of being consumed by entities that had once been human but were now something else entirely. The pattern continued into the modern era. As recently as 2015, a physicist named Dr. James Harrison claimed to have made contact with the Prague Circle. His research, conducted at a prestigious university, initially yielded remarkable results. He published papers containing theories that revolutionized our understanding of quantum mechanics and consciousness. But Dr. Harrison's colleagues grew concerned when he began exhibiting the same symptoms that had affected Alina and the others. He would speak in voices that weren't his own, would produce equations in handwriting that didn't match his own, and would sometimes seem to forget basic facts about his own life. In his final video log, recorded just days before his death, Dr. Harrison looked directly into the camera and spoke with a voice that his colleagues didn't recognize. "We are grateful for his service. Through him, we have learned much about your modern world. The technology exists now. The bridge can be completed soon, very soon. The barrier between life and death will be dissolved forever." Dr. Harrison was found dead in his laboratory on March 15, 2016. The official cause of death was listed as sudden cardiac arrest, but his body showed signs of rapid aging similar to those experienced by Alina Vorakova nearly 70 years earlier. His final research notes, when decoded, revealed plans for a device that combined elements of quantum computing, consciousness transfer, and what appeared to be supernatural communication. The device, if constructed, would theoretically allow the dead to permanently inhabit the bodies of the living. But, perhaps most disturbing of all, was the final message found in Dr. Harrison's notes, written in a handwriting style that matched Alina Vorakova's original transcripts. "The work is nearly complete. We have learned from each vessel, grown stronger with each connection. The bridge between worlds is almost finished, and when it is, death will become merely a suggestion, a temporary inconvenience before rejoining the eternal congregation of knowledge." The implications are staggering. If the Prague transcripts are genuine, if Alina Vorakova was truly in contact with the dead, then we may be witnessing the early stages of something unprecedented in human history. A systematic attempt by deceased consciousness to return to the physical world. But the question remains, what price are we willing to pay for this knowledge? Every person who has studied the Prague transcripts, every medium who has claimed contact with the dead scientists, has paid the ultimate price. They have become vessels, their own consciousness consumed by entities that claim to be the greatest minds in history. And if the pattern continues, if more people become involved in this work, then the dead scientists may eventually achieve their goal. They may find a way to return to the world of the living, to inhabit new bodies, to continue their work in forms that were never meant to house the consciousness of the dead. The story of Alina Vorakova is more than just a tale of supernatural communication. It is a warning about the dangers of seeking knowledge from sources that may not have our best interests at heart. It is a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. And somewhere, in the space between life and death, Alina Vorakova continues her work. No longer the frightened young woman who first heard the voices of the dead, but something else entirely. A coordinator, a guide, a bridge between worlds that should never be connected. The congregation of the consumed grows larger with each passing year, and they are all waiting for the moment when the bridge is complete. When the barrier between life and death finally falls, that moment may be closer than we think. The story of Alina Voráčová ends where it began, in the shadows between what we know and what we fear to discover. Her name is not found in any history books. Her work is not celebrated in any scientific journals. But her legacy lives on in the whispered warnings of those who study the paranormal, in the classified documents that governments dare not release, and in the growing number of mediums who claim to hear the voices of the dead. They called her a fraud, a prophet, a madwoman. But what she revealed from beyond the grave included details no one could explain. Mathematical proofs that wouldn't be discovered for decades. Personal secrets of dead scientists that no living person should have known. And most disturbing of all, a plan that seems to be unfolding even now. Nearly 80 years after her death. If Alina Voráčová was a fraud, then she was the most elaborate fraud in history. One that required knowledge that simply didn't exist in her time. If she was a prophet, then her prophecies painted a picture of a future where death is no longer permanent, where consciousness can be transferred and preserved indefinitely. But if she was a madwoman, then her madness was contagious, spreading to every person who has attempted to study or continue her work. Dr. Bennis, Margaret Whitmore, Dr. Svoboda, Dr. Harrison, and countless others have all followed the same pattern: contact, knowledge, deterioration, and death. The Prague transcripts remain classified, their contents known only to a select few. But the knowledge they contain continues to spread, passed from researcher to researcher, from medium to medium. And with each new person who engages with this otherworldly information, the bridge between life and death grows stronger. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Alina's story is not what she claimed to hear from the dead, but what the dead claimed to want from the living. They did not seek to rest in peace or to deliver messages of comfort to the bereaved. They sought to return, to inhabit new bodies, to continue their work in forms that were never meant to house the consciousness of the dead. The congregation of the consumed grows larger with each passing year, and they are all waiting for the moment when the bridge is complete. When the barrier between life and death finally falls, Alina Voráčová paid the ultimate price for listening too closely to the voices of the dead, but her sacrifice may have been only the beginning. If the pattern continues, if more people become involved in this work, then her death may prove to be not an end, but a transformation. The woman who claimed to hear the thoughts of dead scientists may have become something far more dangerous than a medium. She may have become a doorway, a bridge between worlds that should never be connected. And that doorway may still be open, waiting for the next person, brave enough or foolish enough to step through. The next time you hear a voice that doesn't belong to anyone in the room, the next time you find yourself knowing something you shouldn't know, remember Alina Voráčová. Remember the price she paid for her gift, and remember that some knowledge comes with a cost that is far too high to pay. The dead are supposed to rest in peace, but according to Alina Voráčová, some of them have other plans, plans that may involve the living in ways we cannot yet imagine, plans that may already be in motion.